Today, we are also launching a brand new series called Starting Blocks. And as we move into this next year, the new year is always a time for reflection. And whether you're a resolution person or not, the new year is just kind of a natural time to be able to look at, okay, how did the last year go? And for many of you did this over the last couple of weeks. You looked at, okay, how did the last year go? And what do I want, or what am I looking forward to in this next year? And it's just a natural thing for most of us. And while I'm also not really a resolution person, I do think that process of reflecting is important. And I do think that process of looking at, okay, where am I at? Kind of knowing where you're at and knowing where you're going is important. And asking yourself this question, okay, is my direction actually leading to the destination that I want? We talked about that in the principle of the path. And that process it's important in life. And so what I want to do for us as a church and as a family, and for those of you who are joining us and trying to figure this whole thing of Jesus out, what I want to do is for us to be able to look at, okay, how does God call us to think about this? And also, are we engaging it the right way as we move into this next year? So, to get us started, I want to take you to this passage where God introduces, or he talks to us about this picture that captures the way he thinks that we should look at life. So the passage is found in 1 Corinthians, and it says this. It says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize?" So he starts off and he begins to paint this picture. And God steps into our life, he says, and he begins to use this picture of a race. And as he's talking to us about life, he uses the picture of a race. He says, I want for you to think about it this way. I want for you to think about it as a race. This isn't the only time that he does this. There are multiple times where he uses this picture of a race. He says, I want for you to think about it as a race. And then he says this, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? And then he says this, run in such a way as to get the prize. He says, not only do I want you to think about this as a race, he says, but I want for you to run to win. He says, as we're on this journey together, and for us, as we move into this next year together, I think God steps in. He says, I want for you to think about this next year, or the race, the life in general. I want for you to think about it as a race. And I want you to run to win. Let me ask you something. And this was challenging for me as I was preparing for this series, because I had to ask myself this question. Is that how I engage life? Am I running to win? Let me ask you about in another way. When you think about your spiritual journey, so let's not talk about life as a whole. Let's just talk about your spiritual journey. Are you running to win? Is that the way you think about it? Over the last couple of weeks, as you sat down to reflect and kind of, okay, what was last year like? What is this next year going to look like? Did you sit down and say, okay, how do I make sure I win? Second question, why not? I'm going to assume the answer is no. because for most of us, that's not at all how we think about it. That's not how we engage it. So the other question then becomes this: why not? God says, run in such a way as to get the prize. I want you to run to win. Then he continues. He says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. He says, listen, if you're going to be a runner, you go into training. You don't just wing it. Hopefully you've never tried to run a race just winging it. I remember a couple of years ago, I grew up as a runner. I was a cross-country runner, long-distance runner, and track. And a couple of years ago, my friend and I decided that we were going to train for a triathlon. And for some reason, in my mind, I thought, oh, I can still run like I ran in high school. And we went out running for the first time, and I learned very quickly that was not true anymore. Things had drastically changed. If you want to run well, you have to train. He says they go into strict training, and then he says this: they do it to get a crown that will not last. He says they're putting all this time and energy into running this race, and it doesn't matter. It's perishable. No one's going to care about it. And then he says this: but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. He says, but you run for something that lasts forever. So I want you to run to win. Why don't we? My son started playing basketball recently, which was surprising to me because he hasn't played since he was in 4th grade, but he grew a foot last year, which helps with basketball. So he decided he was going to go out for the freshman basketball team. He's actually starting for the team, even though he hasn't played since he was in 4th grade, and he's getting better and better, but he's driving me crazy because he keeps talking to me about Kobe Bryant. He keeps talking to me about Kobe Bryant every day. And I'm like, listen, he's not even that good. And it's very painful to my heart because I'm a Michael Jordan fan. But he just keeps talking to me, and he keeps talking to me about the Mamba mentality. Have you heard about the Mamba mentality? It's like, I got to have the Mamba mentality. And I was like, he didn't even create it. There was someone who came before him who was so much greater. But it's interesting. I don't know if you know what the Mamba mentality is, but it's just the idea of going into every day deciding you're going to be better than the day before. It's the idea of running the race to win, not necessarily as it pertains to I'm going to beat someone out, but as it pertains to I'm going to finish the race with the best time possible. I'm not going to finish 1 second slower than I could have. And so I'm striving to win. Are you running to win? He says, therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. He says, I'm not out for a jog. I'm not enjoying the sights. He says, I do not fight like a man beating the air. He says, I'm not just meaninglessly throwing punches. And then he says this: no, I beat my body and make it my slave. In other words, he says, I bring my body into submission, just like a runner that trains his body. And you go through those long runs and it's painful, but what are you doing? You're training, you're preparing for what's ahead. He says, I do the same thing. I engage life this way so that after I've preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. He says, no, I want to run to win, to be able to come to the end of it and to hear my Father say, well done, my good and faithful servant. Why? Because I finished. As best as I could. I ran to win. He says, this is how I want for you. This is how I want for you to think about life. How I want for you to engage life. And as we move into this next year, I want to shift our mindset because I don't think very many of us think about our life that way, and very few of us think about our spiritual life that way. And you're not coming into it and say, I want to win. And a big part of it, and you ask the question why, a big reason why for many of you that you don't go into life this way is because you think you can't. And that's a lie. Jesus Christ gave his life for you, not just so that you could be forgiven, but so that his Spirit could live within you. And the scriptures teach us that the hope of glory is Christ in you. Do not discredit what Jesus can do through you. Not for 1 minute. It's not a matter of whether we can. You can. But we have to change the way that we think about it. And we have to change the way that we engage it. Now, here's the great thing about our Father. Our Father doesn't just call us to this, he also equips us for it. And you see this consistently throughout Scripture. A lot of times people focus in on what he's called us to, but they don't talk about, okay, how has he actually equipped us to do it? And our Father says, listen, I'm using everything in your life to do this. I'm using everything in your life for you to win. As a matter of fact, there's another passage where he talks about the race. He uses this same illustration, and he talks about how he uses something that most of us don't even expect. So in Hebrews, he uses the same picture. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and before this, he's talking about all these unbelievable individuals of faith and how they live their life with faith. And he says, since we're surrounded by all these individuals who have shown us God's faithfulness through their faith, he says, since we have all these witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race. Same picture. God says, I want you to think about it this way. I want you to run with endurance the race that is set out before us. Looking to Jesus, he says, I want you to run the race. And then he begins to talk about how Jesus ran the race. He says, I want you to look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. This is him enduring the race. He endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. This is I want for you to consider how he engaged the race, and I want for you to consider the difficult things that God brought into that journey. And then he says this, in your struggle against sin, so he talks about how Jesus' struggle against sin, how he gave his life for it. He says, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. He says, you haven't come to the point where you're having to resist the brokenness of the world to the point where you have to give your life. He said, but this is what God's called us into. And then he says this, and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when you are reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. And in this passage, he's saying, listen, I want you to run the race, and I want you to know this. Even the difficult things God brings into your life, even those things, he's using to train you for the race ahead. Everything that he brings into your life, he's using, and as the passage continues, it says that when we have been trained by it, that it actually produces a harvest of righteousness. Now there's all of this that God brings into our life when we are trained by even the difficult things that he brings into our life. He says all of it God's using. All of it God is using to train you for the race ahead. This is how God defines discipline. Discipline is not punishment for the past. Discipline is training for the future. And he says even the difficult things he's using to prepare you for the future. And so God not only calls us to it, he's working for it. He's working towards it in our lives. And along the way, he's equipping us. He's equipping us with tools, and he's equipping us to be able to run well. And he does that in all sorts of different ways. There's all sorts of different things that he says, okay, this is going to help you to be able to run well. This is going to be able to help you to be able to win. This is going to be able to help you to thrive. There's all sorts of different things that he brings into our life, but some of them are critical. Some of them are critical. I call these starting blocks. What I mean by that is this. They're critical practices and they're critical disciplines that give you leverage. If you've ever been a racer, you know the significance of starting blocks. Now, we use the picture of a swimmer because it's the same thing with a swimmer. Whether you're a runner or a swimmer, you understand. If you don't have starting blocks, you're not going to win. If you're a sprinter, if you grew up being a sprinter, you know this. You can be the faster racer, but if you don't have starting blocks, you're going to lose. Why? Because you don't have leverage to launch yourself into the race. If you're a swimmer and you're on the side of the pool, you don't have that starting block, you don't have the leverage, and you're going to lose in the first 5 strokes. You're going to lose in the first 5 steps. And there are certain things that are so critical, and they make a drastic difference in your ability to be able to run the race. And so what I want to do in the next few weeks is, one, shift the way that we're thinking about this. Okay, I'm not just running to enjoy it, to enjoy the sights. I'm not just trying to survive. No. I want to run to win. I want to win this year spiritually. To shift the way that we think about it, and then to be able to walk through, okay, what are some of these critical things, these starting blocks, these things that allow us to launch ourselves into the race. And today I want to introduce you to the first one. To do that, I want to take you to this ancient story. It's found in the history of the nation of Israel, and it's found at a time when the nation of Israel has just escaped from slavery. So God has rescued them from slavery. They've been in slavery for 400 years. God has led them out of the nation of Egypt. And as they come out of the nation of Egypt, they're in the wilderness. And as they're making their way through the wilderness, they haven't yet arrived at the promised land. So as they're making their way through it, they are an easy target. They're an easy target. They're somewhat disorganized. I mean, they've been slaves for a long time. And so there's multiple nations that say, hey, listen, we can take everything from these people. Let's just attack these people. We can take everything from them. One of those groups is the Amalekites. So I want to take you to this moment, Exodus chapter 17, when the Amalekites decided, hey, listen, we're going to go take everything from these people. So the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. So they attack. The Amalekites come and attack the nation of Israel. Moses says to Joshua, hey, listen, go out and defend us. Choose some of our men to go out and fight against the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So Moses says, I'm going to go to the top of the hill and I'm going to watch this, and he has the staff with him. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. Now, some of you know who Moses is. Some of you don't really know that much about Moses, but you saw a movie once, and you know that there's like this staff thing, and there's all sorts of things that can happen with the staff. The staff is kind of this image of God's presence and God's power, and you're like, I know that he can like throw it down and turn into a snake. But there's a lot of different ways that you see this staff be used. It's just an image of God's presence and power. So Moses goes to the top. Joshua is defending the nation against the Amalekites. Moses goes to the top of the hill, and he's holding this staff up. Now, I don't know how they figured this out. I don't know if God told him you have to hold it up. I'm not sure. We don't have all the details of it. It's just a short story. But Moses goes to the top, and he's holding up this staff, and whenever he has it up, they're winning. Whenever he lowers it, they begin to lose. Again, I would love to know how they figured it out. Was it like, ooh, well, like at some point did they have fun with it? I don't know. But what we do know is that when he had his hands up, they were winning. And when they came down, they were losing. And so the day begins to go on. And as the day goes on, Moses begins to grow tired. I don't know if you've ever tried to hold up your hands for an entire day. It's amazing how quickly you get tired. Some of you know that. You can't even hold up your hands for a whole song. But he's trying to hold his hands, but he begins to get tired. But they realize, man, if he can't hold his hands up, we're going to lose. And here, God does something really cool. So God takes this moment, and I don't know, again, did he command him to do it? Did he kind of set up? But God takes this moment to teach something unbelievable. And I think he does it for Moses to learn this. I think he does it for us to be able to learn this. Because Moses had this problem. Moses liked to do everything himself. Moses had a huge problem with delegation. As a matter of fact, as the leader of the nation of Israel, as they're coming out of slavery, one of the things that he did is that he was the judge over all of the conflicts inside of the nation. And so whenever someone had a conflict, they would bring it to Moses. But he was the only one doing this. So one day his father-in-law shows up and is like, what are you doing? Because he sees this huge line of people that are coming to see Moses, and they're all waiting in line all day, and he's sitting there making all these decisions all day, and his father-in-law comes to him and says, what are you doing? You're doing this wrong. Like, you should appoint, which is always great when your father-in-law shows up and says you're doing it wrong. I imagine Moses was thrilled. I didn't even invite you. Why are you here? But he had a problem with this. We know that. And so God in this moment does something really beautiful. And so Moses begins to grow tired. Listen to how it continues. It says, when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And God does this really beautiful and powerful thing. Because here's the deal. Listen to me. Listen to me. Most of us think that winning looks like this. Most of us think, no, what's the picture? This is what winning looks like. Rocky taught us this. This is what winning looks like. You run to the top of the stairs. This is what winning looks like. And God comes in and says, no. I'm going to ask Sarah and older Kyle to come join me on stage. God says, winning doesn't look like this. It looks like this. This is what it looks like to win. Now, here's the thing. Most of you think this is what losing looks like. And you think that if you need this, you've lost. And God says, you couldn't be more wrong. This is what it looks like to win. Thank you. But we have to change the way that we think about that. And if you don't, you will not win. If you continue to think that that's losing, you will lose. But your Father has stepped in, and in this really unbelievable, beautiful, powerful way, in this moment, he demonstrates for Moses, for the nation of Israel, for all of us. He says, no. This is how you win. But that means, in order to win, you have to build community. You can't do it alone. And there's going to be time after time after time where you can't hold your arms up anymore. And you need someone else who can. And there's going to be time after time after time where the people around you can't hold their arms up anymore. And they need you to help them. And one of those starting blocks is that community. If you don't have it, you're going to get caught flat-footed. You're not going to be able to win. And so as we look at, okay, what should we reflect on? What do I need? The first thing, one of the first starting blocks is that you need to look at your community. What does your community look like? Now, here at Hope and Grace, we talk about this in terms of circles, because biblical community, I think, is comprised of different circles of people. And listen to me, no one's going to build this for you. This is your responsibility. You have to take responsibility for your community. I encounter people all the time, they want me to build it for them, they want the church. No. You have to take responsibility for your community. You have to build it. No one can build it for you. And we talk about this in terms of circles, because I think when you look at the biblical precedent, you look at the New Testament and the relationships in their lives, there are different circles of relationships. The first one is what we call Paul's. So a Paul is a spiritual mentor. You need people in your life that are just a step ahead of you. They don't have to be unbelievably wise and live on the top of a mountain. No, they just need to be someone that you can reach out to when you have a question that you can't figure out. And you're going to have people who are good at this in all sorts of different areas. You need to comprise a group of people that you know, like, hey, listen, I can reach out to them when something's going wrong. This is a Paul. You need those people in your life. Now, sometimes I do have people come up to me, and they're like, I've went through the whole community. There's just really no one who could be a Paul for me. If that's you, you may be thinking too highly of yourself spiritually. You may be thinking too highly. And so it's just someone that's a little bit ahead of you. Another one is Barnabas. Paul never goes anywhere alone. He doesn't plant a single church by himself. He constantly is in community. He has Barnabas. He has Barnabas, Silas. There's multiple individuals. These are companions. They're on the journey with you. They're experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing. They're going through the same things that you're going through. You need Barnabases in your life. You need Timothys. These are people that you're one step ahead of, that you get to pour into. Again, we complete God's love, not when we receive it, but when we give it away. You need people that you're pouring into. Another one is Felix's. You need spiritual seekers. Paul had this great relationship with Felix where he's just trying to help him understand who God is. You need people in your life who don't know God yet. If you don't think that that's important to your spiritual journey, you are dead wrong. You need people that help you see. Man, what it's like to not have Jesus, that help you see what God has poured into your life, because you see, man, I see how it shows up when it's not there, and that you're introducing them to Jesus for them to find that. You need those circles. As a matter of fact, our growth planners, many of you have this, you already picked this up. If you don't have it, these are actually back in stock. They just got in stock this week. And one of the things that we do here on a monthly basis, it's called your experience plan. And as part of that experience plan, what we're asking you to do is to be able to identify, okay, when it comes to Paul's or Barnabas's or Timothy's or Felix, who do I need to spend time with this month? Who do I need to spend time with this month? So that I'm building and developing those circles, so that I'm building and developing that community. Why? Because you can't win alone. You can't win alone. And for some of you, you need to begin building that for the first time. For others of you, you've heard this before. You've heard us talk about circles before. You know how important it is. But here's the thing about living here. We live in a really transient area. And so some of you, you've built those circles, and they were strong, and you had great biblical community, but they moved. And you need to go back and look at, okay, where do I need to rebuild? But if you're going to run to win, you have to do it. It's a starting block. It's not just a nice thing along the way. It's a starting block. It's what gives you leverage to launch into the race. You can't do it alone. This is another reason why dinner groups are so important. You need to, as we go into this next year, you need to be in a group. You can sign up to be a part of a group today. If you go to that app, again, it's not on the home page, but if you click engage, And if nothing else, you should just go to this page because it's really funny. We just updated our photos, and if you go to the Engage page, for some reason, there's this photo of Chris laughing really, really hard, and then Grant doesn't find it funny at all. Not even a smile on his face. I talked to him about it after last service, and he said he needs to work on his humor. But if you go to that page, you see, listen, don't move into this next year alone. And I'm not saying if you join a group, you're going to find all of biblical community. That's not going to happen. You're not going to join a dinner group and be like, oh, I met my Paul, and then there was a Timothy there. And then no, that's not going to happen. But as you're a part of a group, you might find one or two. As you're a part of a team, you might find another one. As you're at a connection event, you might find another one. But you need to become intentional. You need to accept responsibility for it and engage that differently. Why? Because winning doesn't look like this. Winning doesn't look like this. And sometimes you're going to need someone to lean on. And they're going to need to lean on you. So run to win. Will you pray with me? Father, I thank you for this unbelievable community that we get to be part of, and this journey, this family that we get to be this for one another. Thank you for this incredible moment where you just gave us such a clear picture of what it looks like to actually win. I pray that you shift the way that we think about that. And I pray that we'd come out of today committed to not just running to win, but committed to this first starting block. Now, I'm going to make sure, as we move into this next month, I'm going to do what needs to be done to lay the groundwork for building that community. In Jesus' name, amen.